A group of young pubescent prisoners look down at their feet, glancing at the chains that draw them near the looming city of Athens. They've been taken captive and are now expected to perform for older men or even older women. Perhaps they might get a lucky break and be taken as a concubine by a powerful man. Regardless, male concubines in ancient Greece usually had a tough life, but how unpredictable was it really? Let's find out today with Newfound History. Prostitution was a common economic activity in ancient Greece. In many cities, it was an important part of the economy and gave sex workers an income and social mobility in society. Sex work wasn't secret. Picture walking through the streets of Athens and you'll find brothels all over the city, even outside of the red light districts of the time. The brothels were mostly sex segregated. There were those with only women and others with only male slave boys. Sounds weird compared to present-day standards, right? What made this possible in Greece was their liberal opinions on sex work. Many people might be against the idea in the present day, but in Athens it was quite the opposite. Instead of condemning the workers, cities regulated them to ensure workers were paid their worth, and those seeking their services also knew what to expect. In fact, the legendary lawmaker Solon is known for creating state brothels with regulated prices, involving both sexes differently. The Solonian brothels were accessible and affordable to all. Supposedly, one obol, the rough equivalent to $10 was all they needed to get in and fulfill their desires. Solon's taxes on brothels were used in building a temple for Aphrodite. Talk about leveraging a return on investment. However, not all sex workers were in brothels. There were also independent prostitutes working in the street. Male and female prostitutes had different origins. Females were most likely foreign, metic women who couldn't find other work, or poor widows, while males tended to be slave boys from other conquered cities who were sent to work at the brothels until they grew up, and there's a reason for that we'll learn later. The most famous of these is Phaedo of Elis, who was reduced to slavery during the capture of his city and sent to work at a brothel until the philosopher Socrates purchased his freedom. The man became a loyal follower of Socrates and a philosopher himself, until Socrates was inevitably sentenced to death for corruption in 399 BCE after an oracle claimed he was the wisest man in Athens and was forced to drink the poisonous elixir of the hemlock plant. Male slave boys could even serve as sexual partners for women, although that wasn't a common occurrence. As for the clientele, it was mostly male. Greek men would hire prostitutes cheaply for pleasure or sometimes as escorts or even female entertainers. They'd also hire men. Men rarely married before the age of 30 and couples rarely slept together, so it was seen as okay for men to hire male prostitutes. Remember what we said about the male clientele purchasing male prostitutes? Well, in Greece, it was the norm for a man to find both sexes equally attractive. But don't think this meant that bisexual men in ancient Greece had the best quality of life, because the power dynamics between two males back then were vastly different from now. Ancient Greeks had fewer stigmas around sexuality compared to other places. In fact, male-male relationships were often depicted in art and literature, and some cities even had festivals that celebrated same-sex relationships. In Athens, a traditional same-sex relationship would almost always involve an adolescent boy and a much older man, something legally unthinkable in present times. And let's not even talk about Sparta, where pederasty was practically mandatory. Boys would be paired up with Spartan warriors as their sexual partners and companions, with the warrior serving as a mentor until they married off at the age of 30. Undergoing sexual companionship with younger boys was practically a requisite for older male Spartans. Regardless, male concubines could also do well if they were with someone of power. So who were these powerful men? If a young man was taken in as a concubine by a wealthy and powerful individual, he could expect to receive an education, fine clothing, and other luxuries. Their life depended a lot on the circumstances of their employment. Most young men who became concubines were originally slaves, and despite being favored and loved by their households, they were considered socially inferior as they were not freeborn citizens, so the option to rise in the social ranks of society was appealing to many. They might be given the opportunity to receive an education and learn skills that would benefit them in the future. Some male concubines even became famous philosophers, poets, or politicians. Even the warrior king Alexander the Great was known to have taken male concubines during his military campaigns. However, they would always be expected to provide sexual services to their master and sometimes even to multiple men for the satisfaction of their master's fetishes. In most cases, concubines would be treated poorly and be forced to endure harsh living conditions, subject to physical abuse or forced to perform menial tasks. The average life of a Greek male concubine was often unpredictable and depended on the whims of their master. They had little control over their lives and were essentially treated as property. While some male concubines may have had a relatively comfortable existence, many others would have faced a great deal of hardship and mistreatment. In these relationships, the older man was known as the Erastes, and the younger one was the Eromenos. The relationship dynamics were a bit iffy. Not all relationships between Eromenos and Erastes were exploitative or abusive. The inherent power imbalance in these relationships meant that the Eromenos was often vulnerable to mistreatment or abuse by his older partner. The Eromenos was expected to be lavished in gifts and compliments, yet also to not enjoy the sexual components of the relationship, to be submissive to his Erastes in all ways, sometimes even after he had grown larger than the Erastes himself. This would perpetuate the power dynamics of the relationship beyond its original scope. Strangely enough, the pederastic relationship was sometimes seen as a way to express heterosexual love, with examples of Spartan women dressing in male clothing for their weddings to accommodate this belief. After all, the hairlessness of youth was thought of as a desirable physical attribute in Greek men, which is why the appearance of a beard is seen as the point where the pubescent boy was less desirable. There were cases of Erastes keeping older boys and men as lovers, but depilated them of hair. If noticed in public, this generally brought discrimination. However, once the younger lover grew up or became capable of growing a beard, the relationship often ended and the concubine's life would rarely improve. Undoubtedly, the best way for a male concubine to thrive in ancient Greece was by being partnered with a powerful man. If their patron were rich or influential, they'd also want their concubines to be seen as a reward, a trophy husband if we use present-day terms. These relationships were not always viewed negatively and were sometimes seen as a way for a powerful man to take a young man under his wing and mentor him. They were respected as a way to transmit cultural values and skills from one generation to the next, considered an important aspect of Greek society. Yet, where did this ideology come from? Part of the reason why these intimate relationships between pubescent and adult men were so normalized in Greek society was Greek mythology. One only has to look at the story of Zeus and Ganymede to have an idea of why the Greeks would allow acts that'd be revolting in present-day society. Ganymede was a prince of Troy, renowned for his extraordinary beauty. Zeus, upon seeing Ganymede, was immediately smitten with him and resolved to make the boy his own. Disguising himself as an eagle, Zeus swooped down from the sky and snatched Ganymede from his home, carrying him off to Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. Once there, Zeus made Ganymede his personal cupbearer, serving the king of the gods with nectar and ambrosia, the divine food and drink that gave the gods their immortality. As time passed, Zeus grew increasingly fond of Ganymede and wished to keep him forever by his side. He offered the boy immortality and eternal youth, but Ganymede refused, longing to return to his mortal life and family. Eventually, Zeus relented and allowed Ganymede to return to Earth, but not before he bestowed upon the young prince the ultimate honor, the stars of the constellation Aquarius, forever immortalizing him in the night sky. The story of Zeus and Ganymede has been the subject of countless works of art and literature throughout the ages, depicting the love between the king of the gods and the beautiful young prince, but most importantly, it summarized Greek views on pederasty. The king of the gods himself had set the example, and it was society's duty to follow it through. What do you think about ancient Greece's liberal view on sex work? And what about the treatment of male concubines? Tell us what you think in the comments below, and thanks for watching this episode of Newfound History.